Céad Míle Fáilte. I'm standing here at Connolly prison in Dublin. 7 days of rebellion in song. And The Call of Erin is a song, words written by James Connolly. And it reminds us that James Connolly thought a great deal about our song tradition. And he said these words, no revolutionary movement is complete without its poetical expression. If such a movement has caught the hold of the imagination of the masses, they will seek to vent it in song for its aspirations, its fears, its hopes, its loves and its hatreds engendered by the struggle. Until that movement is marked by joyous, defiant singing of revolutionary songs, it lacks one of the distinctive marks of a popular revolutionary movement. It is the dogma of a few and not the faith of a multitude. Now, James Connolly wrote many ballads, and The Call of Erin gets the pride of place on a CD that I produced on the 100th anniversary of the rebellion of 1916. In 1803, when Robert Emmet issued the proclamation, the words he expressed and the rights and liberties he demanded were also the same that were demanded by Wolfe Tone and signed by James Connolly in 1916. And they echoed the promise and ambitions of many, many other countries, including the American Declaration of Independence. Over 100 years later, after Robert Emmet's failed rebellion, James Connolly landed in America. There were over 2 million Irish-born people living in the United States at that time. Many of them were of Irish descent and ancestry. It was as if half of Ireland had been transported en masse. The Irish presence, by any standards in America, was extraordinary. Connolly spent almost 9 years in America and wrote this ballad on his journey home. I wrote the music hoping that it preserved the meaning and sentiment of Connolly's wonderful words. The words revealed his feelings and the future of America and Ireland. It is obvious that lyrics that he wrote, he had a love and a value on the tradition of song and music. James Connolly used songs and ballads as a means of communication to and for his people. He wanted to raise the living standards of workers, to give them fair value, good labour conditions, and that were safe and healthy. He fought for an end to child labour and the exploitation of women, and he used the ballads as a source of inspiration and protest. Like many balladeers, he used popular melodies and wedded them to compositions. His most popular printed ballad was The Watchword, and he wrote this song and was first published in Scotland. He went and wrote songs, valiant songs for support of many of his causes in America, and they were published in the Harp newspaper. Through his travels in America, his compositions were frequently seen in other papers across the United States. And he corresponded in Ireland with William O'Brien, and many of his ballads, and some that were never published, were collected by him. James Connolly's journey across America was extraordinary. He traveled to El Paso in Texas, to Butte, Montana, Denver, Colorado, Tucson, Arizona, San Francisco, California, Grand Rapids in Michigan, Rock Rapids in Iowa, just to name a few cities. Many of the newspapers gave Connolly's notice. His speeches in Cleveland, the Plain Dealer, the biggest circulation newspaper in Cleveland, called him a forceful speaker, well versed in the history and literature of the country, and his speaking draws from the abundant store of knowledge gained from both great study and wide experience. James Connolly, make no mistake, was a great orator. He was much sought after as a speaker. 1 month before he came home to Ireland, he was speaking to the striking steelworkers in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That's a measure of the commitment he had to raise the standards of people. He was also very skilled and calm in debates. He was self-educated and widely read on Irish and world history. And few in labour circles could match his power of oratory. Many were envious of his work rate and his commitment to the cause of Labour. He was described by Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. Now, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, her name Lizzie Flynn, was a Labour activist that lived at his time, and he was described as a short, rather plain-looking man with a large black moustache, a high forehead, dark eyes, and a man who rarely smiled. He was a scholar, an excellent writer, she says. His time in America was very important for the Labour movement, and his presence there resonates today. There are 2 statues that I know of erected to him, one in Chicago to mark the respect in his presence there at the 1907 Labour world leaders. They met in Chicago, and another in Albany, New York, where his family lived for almost 3 years. So it's important that we remember that James Connolly staying in America, there was a lot of unemployment, and in Salt Lake City, the Tribune, the paper there, called him an elegant Irishman, and in Boston Herald, the Boston Herald said he was a man of pleasing personality. His manner is that of an orator, and his language is that of a scholar. The Detroit paper said of him, he was a vivid and forceful and eloquent exposition of his thoughts and a well-fortified defense of its principles. During his years and times he spent in America, there was widespread unemployment, and at many times he was unemployed. However, he did learn much and became an expert at strike planning and procedure. And during the 1913 lockout, that experience held him good. James Connolly's greatest contribution in America was his understanding and practice how industrial unionism worked and how best to use its militant power. James Connolly had left Ireland as a Labour theorist, but he came back with a lot of practical experience. I'm always very grateful indeed for the times and understanding that he had of the wider problems in the world. And many of the things he forecast in his writings have come true. He was a man who could see the future, and I understand why he brought so many people with him, because he was a great man, and truly we should remember him here at least tonight, and remember him as one of our greatest Irish patriotic figures, James Connolly, the Call of Erin.